Recently, the new Game of Thrones prequel called House of the Dragons just came out, and it has received a ton of praise from audiences and critics alike. And while the show has some merits, that doesn't mean it's flawless. And today I'll be talking about one of the many problems that the show presents, its pacing. While the show is exceptionally written, many of the positives that the show has is brought down by the show's messy pacing. And today we'll be doing a bit of a deep dive into its pacing and why it doesn't work. However, I will be also talking about its pros and a few of its cons, other than the pacing, of course. However, most of this video's runtime will be focused on the show's pacing. This video will contain spoilers for House of the Dragons and potential spoilers for the first few seasons of Game of Thrones. However, if you don't mind spoilers or have already seen the show, then we can begin. Pacing in media is a crucial foundation of how you make your media have some kind of flow to your story. Without it, the story can drag, feel way too rushed, and if it's really bad, then it can bring down the other elements in your media. House of the Dragon's pacing is what I can only describe as inconsistent and all over the place. We start off with an excellent opening 2 episodes, and then up until episode 7, it feels rather messy and all over the place. This problem can be mostly attributed to one thing, that being the rather massive time jumps. The first 2 episodes are centered in a pretty reasonable time frame. We get an introduction to the characters, what their problems and challenges are, and a potential look at what the story is going to be. The first 2 episodes are well written and pretty intriguing to see what the outcome of next week's episodes might be. Then episode 3 comes along and we see a massive 2-year time jump. 2 years, while the first 2 episodes were 6 months apart, which is still a massive jump, but not as big as 2 years. In the first couple of episodes, we are introduced to another antagonist known as the Crab Feeders. Daemon plans to go to war with these crabs, and from the amount of time that has passed from episode 2 to 3, you would assume that they would be pretty hard to beat. Well, you would be absolutely wrong. Daemon pretty much takes care of them with ease and barely much of an inconvenience to him. The most thing that happens to him is they get shot in the shoulder with an arrow. Why did that take you 2 years? But that's not the only thing that's problematic with these time jumps. Why did it take you 2 years if you could kill them this easily? This isn't the only inconsistency the time jumps cause, but that's not the only thing that is problematic with these time jumps. One major problem that the time jumps cause is a lot of missing character development. So most of the time, these episodes will try to get you up to speed with characters who have been changing for years into an hour-long episode. That's years of development shoved into one episode, and it feels exactly how it would feel. It feels awkwardly placed. It feels weird how this show just kind of shoos away its details in order for the real plot to happen. It doesn't let the show properly breathe and take its time. Instead, it is constantly hopping from one timeline to another, which is not only jarring for the viewer, but takes away a lot of crucial character development that could have been shown in this show. Sometimes this show will force you to play catch-up in order to even understand what's going on. It's convoluted and unnecessary at points, especially with that 10-year time jump that they later use. At most, they could have at least had an extra episode in each timeline to flesh out the characters more and the plot lines that they're establishing, but instead they jump forward to where a lot of characters have changed. A lot of the plot has also changed. It feels like you're watching 5 different shows at the same time for the first half of the show, and all of them conclude in the most unsatisfying ways possible. That's saying if they even conclude at all. Like I said in my She-Hulk video, if you're going to have massive time jumps in your plot, or off-screen character development, then the bare minimum you can do is at least show where said character will be going in said off-screen development. And in the later half of the show, they do end up using that technique, so I'll give credit where it's due. The rushed subplots and plot lines, the recasts and switch-ups and the actors are very jarring to look at. The way the show frenetically glides past things without waiting to develop its characters and world properly. The show has 3 massive time jumps, the first being 2 years, then another 10 years, and then another massive 6 fucking years. Side characters appear and disappear, which makes it hard to connect with some that get development in episodes. Some characters will be hypocritical in order for things to progress. Like, for example, Alicent's hypocrisy. Let me explain. Why was Alicent so angry about Rhaenyra's relationship with her uncle when later on she had no problem marrying her daughter and son to one another? Of course her hypocrisy would make her more interesting of a character if they actually explained her logic. That would be a lot better. When it does actually take its time to slow down in the show, it's mostly to try and explain everything that has been happening in the time jump they did. I get that the ultimate goal of the story that's trying to be told here is the Dance of the Dragons story, and that we need to get through the backstory to the actual conflict in the story. If early Game of Thrones has taught the audience anything, it's that the build-up to the story is just as important as the major plot points. We're moving through this plot way too quickly just to get to the Dance of the Dragons, but it's rushing the pacing way too much, to the point that the end climax isn't as impactful as Game of Thrones Season 1's climax. There's so much character development that needed to happen in these episodes, in showing the dynamic between Alicent and Viserys' marriage, and how did Alicent feel about it? Did she want to be queen, or was she nothing more but a pawn to her father? Did she bother to try and repair the relationship with Rhaenyra in that time gap? Well, I don't fucking know, because these time gaps are so big we don't see any of this character development. This show could have avoided all these major problems caused by the time jumps, either by having more episodes per season, or a longer runtime for every episode. Maybe the time jumps wouldn't have been so jarring if every episode they transitioned from older actresses to the younger ones. The pacing would have been unaffected, and it would have established to the audience that we'll be seeing both of the actresses in the same episode for future episodes to come. Let's talk a bit more about that jarring 10-year time gap, and some of its flaws and unanswered questions. Why is Criston such an asshole? Is it because of Rhaenyra denying him? There's so many questions to ask, but not much in the way of answers. A lot of the characters' motivations just immediately change in such a short window of our time. In conclusion, the pacing feels messy, unorganized, and sometimes it feels flat out jarring to the audience. And while the show is well made, the pacing sometimes can bring it down awfully. It brings the show down so much, more times than I can count in a lot of episodes. And I've heard for season 2 that they might be doing some sort of change in where the pacing will be a lot better since they're now at the Dance of the Dragons story. But holy fuck, is this pacing just awful. That'll do it for the pacing part of the video. I feel like I talked about the pacing of this show enough. So we'll move on to the other parts of the video. That being my thoughts on the show in its entirety and not just the pacing. In terms of the cinematography, I have no problems with it. As usual, the camera work in the show is absolutely stellar, and I wouldn't expect anything less from a Game of Thrones related show. However, its lighting is really weird in some episodes. Sometimes it is way too dark, and sometimes it's just fine. I really don't understand, especially in the 7th episode Driftmark, where its darkness is so fucking dark that sometimes you just can't see shit. The music, as usual, is bombastic and dramatic. Even if there are things to dislike about the show, the scenes would always be improved by the music. The music is a crucial part of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragons, and trust me when I say the music is just as good as its successor. However, one problem I have that's kind of music related is the title theme to the show. Now, I know it's tough to surpass already one of the greatest TV openers of all time, but they didn't even really try with this one. I wish it would have been a different theme instead of it being the same as Game of Thrones' theme. It feels quite different compared to Game of Thrones, so you would think to expect a different theme from a show that is different from the original. But no, we get the same thing. Not even a remix, and the visuals for the intro just look bland and boring. Wow, a river of blood is the best you could come up with? Nevertheless, despite the intro looking horrible, and the first half of the show being a real mixed bag for me, it really picked up in the last third for me. Driftmark was such an excellent episode for me, and while it did have a couple issues, the episode as a whole was magnificent. Aemond is such a great foil for me. He's intimidating throughout the whole time he's here. I guess he's this show's Joffrey, except he's less of an annoying cunt than Joffrey. Aemon is very interesting to me, since he plans his attacks very carefully at times and can be quite patient and cunning, but sometimes he has these outbursts of anger, and in those times he pretty much wants to kill everyone near him with a pointed stick. Nevertheless, he's a great foil in the show, and while him killing Viserys was pretty expected, the way in which it happens is fucking terrifying. Throughout the entire chase, you are hoping Viserys will make it back in one piece, and then when he seemingly manages to avoid Aemond, he has this moment of peace and clarity up in the sky for a second. He's finally out of the grey, moody clouds and up in the beautiful, clear sky. However, even in the clear sky, he still manages to get killed. It's an interesting piece of symbolism there, and I liked how almost immediately after Aemon kills him, his face is the definition of the "oh shit, I just fucked up" expression. The Lord of the Tides episode was an excellent send-off to King Viserys, and was by far my favourite episode of the season. I could do an entire video on that episode, it's near perfect. I love during the dinner scene how Viserys' rotten part of the face is facing Alicent because of everything she's done. Despite her love and care for him, she still is betraying him. And Viserys' untouched part of his face, the not rotten part of his face, is facing Rhaenyra because she's pure and didn't betray the king, obviously. The final scene of him withering away on his deathbed was heartbreaking, and despite whatever Viserys' flaws were as a person, this was emotionally heartbreaking to watch. When I first saw how he looked, I was genuinely shocked. It made me feel awful, and I just felt sad watching him. He got what he wanted in the end, for his family to get along with one another during dinner while he was there. Everything he wanted happened for him before he died. I love the turning point of brothers in Viserys and Daemon's relationship when Daemon helped Viserys up the stairs. But if I'm going to be honest here, I really don't know what to think of this show. On one hand, it is elegantly shot, at points is wonderfully written, and has some interesting characters. On the other hand, it's sloppily paced. At times, the writing can be contrived or sometimes just outright lazy. And the fact that there's not enough emphasis on depth with these characters is frankly quite concerning. I've heard that this season is the only season that will be like this, but even still, this season is definitely one mixed bag for me, and it definitely redeemed itself near the end of the season. In the end, is the show as masterful as people say? No. The fact that in the penultimate episode of the season, at the end of the episode, the lady just breaks in the room with her dragon, has the opportunity to kill the family, and just doesn't take it, was a very odd writing choice to me. I know what people will say that it gets mentioned in the season finale, but her reasoning is just really dumb, and is such a lazy excuse as for why she can't kill off the main antagonist just yet. It feels like they have some form of plot armor of some kind. Anyway, while this show does have a lot of flaws, that doesn't mean I would consider the season to be a bad one. It just got off on the wrong footing at times is all. I thoroughly enjoyed this season, and would recommend giving this a shot if you're skeptical. If the ending to Game of Thrones made you quite reluctant to watch this show, then I would strongly advise that you watch this show because it won't disappoint you. Well, it will in a couple of areas, but it's mostly great. For my overall rating of the show, I'm going to give the first season of House of the Dragons a nice 7 out of 10. Thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Join my Discord to be a part of the community. Follow my Serialized and Letterboxd for my ratings of film and TV that aren't covered on this channel. And follow me on Twitter for video updates, personal opinions, and more. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye!